Welcome to Your City on Community 7 Television. I'm Schutz Wies and I'm your host. Each month we look at a different aspect of what's going on in the city of Billings. This month we're going to talk to the Ward 3 council members. Danny Choriki and Denise Joy represent Ward 3. That's where I live, so of course I'm going to be very interested in all they have to say. We're going to start out by visiting with Danny, and Denise will be on a little bit later, but Danny, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, no problem. It's a pleasure being here.
All right, so talk to us a little bit about your background. Did you grow up in Billings? Did you come to the area? Give us some of your background.
So my parents moved to Bozeman in the 50s in order to go to college. So I was born in Bozeman, ended up growing up in a small town called Moccasin, went to school in Great Falls and Bozeman and around the place. I ended up moving to New York City in 1984, which was the same year that my parents moved to Billings. So essentially I didn't live in Billings until I moved back here 7 years ago, I guess it was.
All right. And what got you kind of interested in the city council and serving on the city council? What drew your interest to that?
Well, when I was in high school in Great Falls, I got put on the school traffic safety committee, which was a city, county, school committee which looked at the roads and traffic and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up there was a school with one of the one-ways in Great Falls. If you know Great Falls, you know these one-ways that go by there. You know, so there's one school there, and traffic is going by there like 35, 40 miles an hour on a regular basis. And everybody knew that there was going to be an accident there sooner or later. So I came up with this suggestion where we had the older students be traffic guards, right, kind of thing. And we talked about it a little bit, and it kind of got tabled, and nothing happened, and boom, a kid gets hit and killed. And the next week we've hired traffic, hired adults to be traffic guards out there, and it really showed to me how important even the smallest parts of government are, and everybody in the room, were people of goodwill. They didn't want this to happen, but it's just a question of how do you bring the right focus to each problem and find a solution that works for people. So I've been studying what is essentially this social and physical environment that people live in, and trying to understand that relationship and how change happens and how we cope with those types of things since forever, really.
Sure. Now, it's one thing to be interested to be on the city council and have an interest in it, and think about what the job's going to be, and then you get there and you have the job, and it might not exactly be what you thought it was. Is the job what you thought it was, or what's different about the job than what you expected it to be? When
I lived in New York City, I was involved in a number of different department level things there. I've always been involved at some management level, whether in my job or something like that. So I'm very, very familiar with how bureaucracies work, and whether it was the phone company or a law firm or whatever, people are people, and they work within structures. And if you don't understand, and it's when you don't understand that people work within structures that you get surprised by things. So the only thing that was really surprising to me was how emotionally involved I got in various different decisions. I knew I would be to some degree, but I was kind of surprised by just how much it took out of me every Monday night.
Sure. What is your least favorite aspect of serving on the council?
Least favorite aspect of serving on the council is probably the fact that, in my opinion, city government is probably the most important layer of government because it literally defines where we live, where we work, what our daily lives are like. And it is so frustrating to me to see how hard it is to get people to realize that, to understand how important those decisions are that are being made, how spending money on a road in the county is going to influence what's going to happen downtown 20 years from now. So I knew that there would be an educational aspect to the job. It just didn't strike me as how big and how difficult that was going to be.
All right. What is your favorite aspect of serving on the council?
Same thing. My dad was a soil scientist, and he started his own business, the first ag consulting business in Montana, actually. And he didn't do well at it because at bottom he was an educator. He wanted to teach farmers and people how to grow things, and that's really the same thing for me. I came into politics somewhat reluctantly. I would much rather be working behind the scenes trying to get people to understand what the issues are and come to decisions themselves, as opposed to, being out there making the decisions.
Okay. I know kind of over the last few months, you guys have had this COVID protocol and that COVID protocol and all that kind of stuff. Where are you guys kind of at today? Are you meeting in person? What's going on with the city council and what your COVID protocols are today?
We are, the biggest problem with meeting in person right now, we're not meeting in person, we're meeting in Zoom, and the meetings are being streamed live on Facebook or Community 7, here on Community 7. And the biggest problem we have with that is that the council chamber, or the courtroom essentially, which is what it is, really isn't big enough to hold a socially distanced meeting. So we are using COVID funds to build out the community room in the library to have all the electronics and stuff like that in order to do that. But there is tension within the council on this specific issue. Some people want to go right back to face-to-face meetings, and some people, like myself, basically saying, hey, I'm not going to be sitting in a room with 20 or 30 other people for 6 hours until we're past this pandemic. I don't want to become, the center of a cluster.
Sure. Yeah. What other things have you guys done as a council that's been part of your COVID processes and procedures that you think, boy, this has been pretty good, maybe we should use this going forward, even when we're past the pandemic?
Like a lot of businesses and organizations, the whole remote working thing has people are trying it a lot more, and it's turned out to be a lot more viable than people have understood. Plus, I personally did a project back in the 90s when I was in New York City, funded by the phone company, about using video in education and in the judicial system. And I've been a huge advocate of that for Montana, because why should we be getting in a car and driving for 4 hours to go to Great Falls when we can get into a video phone, into a video conference or video phone call with people? I mean, it's not as good as, I admit it, absolutely, but it is still good.
Right.
And I'm seeing that that change is finally starting to happen, not just in Montana, but all over the place.
All right. What keeps you up at night when you think about what's going on in the future of Billings?
Which night are we talking about?
Well, not Monday night. Not Monday night. I know what keeps you up on Monday night. Let's go with Tuesday night.
There are two things. I'll mention both of them, and then I'll talk in depth about one of them a little bit more. One is that we are not preparing. Our economy is not ready for the next generation of workers here in Billings. We're just not ready for it. The whole fossil fuel industry is going to dry up and blow away, and we just don't have anything prepared to change it or to replace it. And people have been screaming about that for a long time, and we're just not making much headway on it. Although Big Sky Economic Development and a couple of other players are doing some interesting things, and there are signs of hope along those lines. But the thing that really worries me is that we are, because of the development style, the sprawl style of building out Billings, we have not built a livable city. And the research and the work that's being done in other areas and other communities has shown over and over and over again that when you make the car the center of your daily life, it disconnects you from people. Whereas if you are walking, you're running into people and you're having interactions with people. I mean, one of the biggest differences in my mind between Bozeman and Billings is that they have a vibrant downtown, which is which is in a fairly enclosed area, and when you go down on Main Street in Bozeman on a sunny Saturday afternoon, you're going to run into a whole bunch of people you know, and there are going to be people out there. Our downtown is spread out. There's not really a center to it, and there's not really anything that draws people to it, you know. So we don't have that walkable component. And the things that we have been doing in the recent past and that we're currently doing are not doing anything to make that happen.
All right, well, I think we've kind of set this question up on a tee for you. If you were king for a day, what was one thing you would change about the city of Billings?
I think if I were king of the state of Montana, the thing that I would change is the legislature has put a whole bunch of regulations on what cities can do for themselves. So, for example, raising taxes. You know, we have asked over and over again for the last few years to have the ability to locally define an additional revenue source, and the state of Montana doesn't let us do it. It controls the relationship between the county and the city. It defines how we can do a lot of different types of development, and those controls may be great for the county side of the city county line, but it really is not good for the few urban areas, which are the economic drivers of the state of Montana right now. I mean, 15% of the people that live in Montana are right here in Billings, and I don't know what the proportion of the economy is, but it's probably a lot more than that.
All right. What does a typical week look like for you on the council? What kind of meetings are you going to? What does a week look like as a city council member?
It varies, but there are probably about 3 or 4 city-type meetings outside of the city hall meeting, you know, with the city administrator, some of the different directors in departments, or one of the different committees or commissions, you know, like the Parks Commission or the Human Relations Commission, stuff like that. So usually there's a couple of those. There's usually a couple of neighborhood meetings, and then, you know, just a handful of phone calls and probably about half an hour a day's worth of email. And then just, you know, I'm not the best at this, but Councilmember Mike Yakowicz is great about walking around in his neighborhood and talking to people in the neighborhood. And I don't have that deep of roots in my neighborhood as he does, you know, so it's not quite the same. But just, you know, walking around at the stores and stuff like that and interacting with people.
Sure.
So it's probably about half of my work hours in a week.
As someone who's grown up in Montana but not lived in Billings and lived away in New York City, what do you find unique about Billings? What makes this place special?
I think the single thing that makes it most special is probably the single thing that we have done the least to take advantage of. We are uniquely in the we are uniquely in the center of a very large region, going down into the Wyoming, out to the Dakotas, you know, which we are the economic center of it, you know, in terms of airplanes, transportation, all that kind of stuff. We're kind of the economic center of it. But we're also very close to a whole bunch of outdoor types of activity things and stuff like that, skiing in Red Lodge, hunting up above Choriki, not hunting, hiking, and hunting, obviously, of course, and stuff like that. We haven't developed those things to a point where Billings becomes the draw, the place that people come to do that. One of the things I would love to see is a bunch of developed bike trails in the region. There are a whole bunch of loops centering around Billings we could do, county roads that could be 40, 50, 60-mile bike trails that have beautiful things to look at and whatnot to do it.
All right, well, Councilmember Choriki, thank you so much for coming down and talking to us. Do we get to know you a little bit better, talk about what you're seeing in Ward 3? I really we all appreciate the time, effort, and energy you put into serving on the City Council and representing us there. So thank you for that, and thank you for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me. And call us anytime you want.
Well, now we're going to expand in Ward 3 and talk to Councilmember Denise Joy. Denise, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about your background. Did you grow up in Billings? Did you come to Billings? Give us some of your background.
Well, I grew up in Hardin. My father graduated from senior high, and my grandparents lived on the south side and in the Triangle, and so I spent lots of time in my childhood being here in Billings. It was a lot more fun to come to Billings than stay in Hardin. We were always coming out for concerts. I mean, all of the things you can do here in Billings you couldn't do in Hardin. And I spent time with my grandparents on the south side, and so after I graduated, I was away, but then I came back to Billings, and so I've been here on and off since the early 90s.
Okay.
So.
And what kind of prompted your interest in running and being on the City Council?
Well, I started attending, that was back in the day before virtual, and I was attending council meetings, and I was just hoping to do a vlog or a blog about local government. And then I just decided after some of the discussions, hey, we need more diversity of voices, and hey, I think I can do that. I want to try that. And so I decided to do that. And I have a background in public policy and public administration, so that's where I decided to run and see if I could get on.
Sure, and you've been on the council for a number of years now. How long have you been on the council now?
Since January 2018, so 2 years, coming up to 3 years now.
Yeah, all right. What have you noticed about how the council has changed? Specifically, how does the council change when you get some new members on there? Talk about what you saw. Okay, this is how we used to do it, and now it's a little bit different. Talk about those differences that you saw.
So we never had motions being made during work sessions before. This is something that kind of, I don't know, evolved, where we're having motions during work sessions. Work sessions are basically where we just learn about topics, explore discussions, that kind of thing. And it has kind of evolved into making motions. So once you start to make motions, then you have discussion, then you have support for or against. And so it kind of has evolved our work sessions into more of a business type motion and counter motions, amendments, that kind of thing. So that's kind of been, I kind of like the informal work setting without the formality of those motions. They only direct staff. They're not business. We can't decide anything. Sure. But they're being used to kind of judge the support behind a particular direction for staff. Yeah. And that's been kind of weird. I haven't quite gotten used to that yet.
What about as far as relationships with other council members? Are you finding yourself, I used to have this kind of relationship with that council member. They're not here anymore, so now I need to find out where this person is. I think I know where I stand on this issue, but maybe I don't.
That has changed quite a bit. I kind of find that it takes a while, especially since we're virtual, to get that relationship going.
Yeah.
So since we're virtual, it's a little bit harder to have that downtime.
Yeah.
Where in the council chamber, we would just have downtime before and after, and we would talk. But now it's basically we come on virtually, so we don't have that downtime to build those relationships and kind of get a little deeper understanding of where someone is coming from. So it's made it just a little bit different. And I could say that having been on the council, even though I've only been there 2 years, I kind of have a sense of seniority in some ways because you've been through a process a little bit more. And so, but yeah, it has been different. And I always try to keep an open mind whenever, and we've had some interesting conversations, ideas that I hadn't heard discussed before because of new members coming on. So you're always kind of like, well, where will that go? How does that work?
You know, one of the things that I always found interesting was that, I've always felt like, okay, I know how Denise is going to vote on this issue. And then she starts talking, and Denise is 180 degrees from where I thought she would be. And those type of things happened, I guess, more than I thought they would. And so probably the longer you've been on the council, I think you're probably seeing more of that.
Right. Yeah, sometimes things come up, and that's a hard kind of jumping to another area. But that's a hard thing I found about council. I didn't realize it'd be so hard to make decisions. I mean, you can say yay or nay, but the thought process of whether or not you're going to support something is really, really important. And I try to keep an open mind and listen to all the information that comes forward. And so maybe sometimes that is a little bit surprising where I say, no, on this particular thing, I can see the value of this side of what could happen.
Sure.
And sometimes things just seem a little infeasible, even though they may be presented very feasible. As you get into the details, you're like, oh, I'm not sure that's going to work out very well.
Yeah. What is your least favorite aspect of serving on the council?
Let me think. I think it's probably some of the length of our meetings. And that's not, I get paid to do that. That's my job.
Yeah.
And I listen very carefully, and I try to be very active in my listening. I try to be very careful and aware of where is a good point for me to speak and where I need to step back and just be quiet and listen.
Yeah.
But after a few hours, that our attention, I think our attention starts to wane a little bit. Our ability to really be on point, and then that part of it, sometimes I feel like we're there past the point of really being good for our job at some point. You know, the public is there. We have to do our job for the public. It's not about me, it's about the public and what Billings needs, not what I need personally or what or my image or anything like that. It's what the city needs. So sometimes that's kind of difficult.
Yeah. What is your favorite aspect of serving on the council?
I think it's getting phone calls and getting emails. I like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not positive. Sometimes people really have differences of opinion with me, and they don't understand why I think a particular way on an issue. But I like the challenge of trying to come to some understanding about an issue. And I've spent a lot of time on the phone actually talking to people and trying to understand where they come from. A limited income, we raise fees, you know, that has an impact on them.
Yeah.
And whether or not something like recode, whether or not there are people who feel that may impose something on them that they don't necessarily want in their neighborhood. So that I find very fun, and it doesn't always work out really well. But I enjoy it because that's why you do the job. And you never, one of the hard things is to really know what constituents are thinking.
Yeah.
Because it's very hard to keep in contact with constituents and figure out where they're at and what they think of something.
Yeah. Walk us through a typical week. What does your week look like? What are you doing? What does it mean to be, what's a week in the life of a Ward 3 City Council member?
Well, I have my job from 8 until 3 in the afternoon, and so from 3 o'clock on, and usually meetings now we're virtual, it's a little bit different, but previous to virtual, I would be, and I still am on meetings until, attending meetings maybe until 9 o'clock at night, depending on when they're scheduled. Monday is completely devoted to council. My whole weekend is devoted to council because I really need to prepare for that meeting. So the weekend is for council. Monday is completely devoted. And as the week progresses, usually on Friday, I pick up a meeting like with Chris Kukulski or a member of staff because they usually have more open time on a Friday before we get to the weekend. So on a Friday, I might have meetings with Chris Kukulski or with a member of staff to talk about some constituent concern or just to talk about where a particular department is headed and updates that they would like us to know about.
Sure. All right. Let's talk about one of the big projects that's on the horizon. Tell us about the West End Water Treatment Plant, what it is, what it's expected to do, where we are in the process. Kind of walk us through where we're at with that.
Well, last night we just got an update, and
Okay.
I was very happy to hear that. I asked the question, they talked about greenfield development of a water treatment center, and I didn't know what that was actually, and they meant built from the ground up. So there's nothing there, and you create it.
Yeah.
And this water plant is going to be unique not only for Montana and Billings, but for the region. This kind of water treatment that has amenities, community amenities, somewhat developed like a park. If we got to the full plan, it would have 2 lakes actually,
Oh, wow.
two reservoirs. So 2 reservoirs with possibilities for fishing, like paddle boarding. We're looking into possibilities for maybe a private partnership where maybe some of the big retail stores would have an opportunity to rent their equipment and people would have opportunities for recreation. But what it really does is make our city resilient in terms of water. So where our water is taken from the river right now, due to the flooding that happened a couple of years ago, the course of the river keeps on changing. And we're at a spot where we take water into the city that isn't really optimal. So by having this a plant on the west end, we're actually going upstream to take our water in. And we will be able to store many, well, actually, we will be able to store water, but the way it will be built, we'll be able to have water no matter what, in terms of them being able to, even at the peak times, continue to process and send that clean water out without storage. Because where we're at right now, as some people know, during peak times, we have about 8 hours of water, and at that point, we'd get into critical areas where maybe like hospitals and stuff would have to be prioritized. So this, where we're at right now is kind of scary.
All right. Now, if you were queen for the day, what would be one thing you would change about the city of Billings?
I love it geologically. This is, I think of the rims and the South Hills as sort of an embrace, where we really, geologically, I mean, the city is very beautiful. I think I probably would maybe make people a little bit more interested in what the city does. Because people are very aware of what happens in Washington. They're not as aware of what happens here in Billings. And so I think I'd maybe make them a little bit more interested or a little bit more concerned about what we do in order to really move us forward in certain ways. A lack of understanding or a lack of interest really can be an obstacle for us being able to do more. And so I kind of would like that kind of power, power over their minds to say, hey, this is what we do. This is how you benefit from what we do. And what would you like this city to look like? And have that relationship with people that is kind of hard to do as a member of council.
All right. Well, Councilmember Joy, thank you so much for coming in and visiting with us. And from all of us in Billings, thank you for the time, effort, and energy you spend on the council. I know there's a lot of late nights and a lot of meetings, so thank you for doing that, and thanks for coming on the program and talking about the City of Billings and Ward 3.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy that Community 7 is a supporter of the council, and we appreciate your support too. Thank you.
Bet.